Have you ever felt something inside you trying to warn you, but you couldn't explain why? Have you ever had that strange, almost silent feeling, as if a soft voice was trying to stop you from following a path that seemed normal, but carried a hidden danger? Most people ignore these small signs. But what if I told you that sometimes it is precisely in this discreet whisper that God tries to save someone from a great tragedy? Have you ever experienced this? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. I almost lost my life because of a simple whisper that I ignored. One of those subtle, almost imperceptible warnings that don't come with thunder, don't come with lights in the sky, don't come with obvious signs. They come in silence. They come as a slight discomfort, a restlessness in the chest, a feeling of don't go, wait a little, something isn't right. And the most striking thing is that when these warnings appear, we almost always try to justify, rationalize, explain as if it were just tiredness, anxiety, or imagination. But there are moments when it's nothing like that. Moments when that whisper is a prophetic deliverance, a divine warning before destruction, a protection that arrives before the fall. How many times have you almost made a decision, only to have something inside you freeze up? How many times has an unexpected delay completely changed the course of your day? Or perhaps a door that closed frustrated you at the time, but later revealed that it saved you from something much worse? Ordinary people, just like you and me, have experienced this without realizing it. And many only understand later, when they look back and realize that that silent discomfort wasn't a coincidence. It was care. It was guidance. It was God speaking in a way that few recognize. Have you ever experienced something like this? Today, you will hear one of the most powerful and real testimonies about prophetic deliverance. A story that begins simply on an ordinary day with an ordinary person, but which took a completely unexpected turn because of something as small as a whisper. A whisper that seemed insignificant, but carried within it the difference between life and death. Perhaps, as you listen to this story, you will realize that similar signs have already appeared in your life, and you may not have noticed. Perhaps God has delivered you from things you can't even imagine. Or perhaps He is trying to warn you now, silently, about something you will still face. If you've ever felt that unexplained tightness in your chest, that sudden urge to change direction, that inexplicable pause, or that gentle thought saying, "Don't do that now," then you need to hear this story, because it will show you that the greatest deliverances don't always come with something extraordinary. Sometimes the extraordinary is hidden in the simple, in the small, in the almost imperceptible, something that seems like nothing, but means everything. And as you delve into this narrative, allow yourself to remember moments from your own journey. Moments when you didn't understand a delay, a change, a discomfort, but today perhaps it makes sense. The truth is that God speaks, God warns, God guides, and often, He does so in such a gentle way that only those who are attentive can hear. Stay with me until the end, because this story is not just a testimony. It's a warning, an awakening, a reminder that you are not alone. And what you are about to discover may open your eyes to signs that were going unnoticed in your life. And it all begins like this, with a seemingly ordinary day, and a whisper that no one could imagine where it came from. Let's delve into this story. And as this story begins to unfold, even before we get to the moment when everything changes, I want to ask you something very simple, yet profoundly important. Because when we talk about signs, deliverances, silent warnings, each person here has a piece of this story within them. Perhaps you have already experienced something similar, an inconvenience that saved you, a delay that protected you, a premonition you couldn't explain. And if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far, or what was the moment when you also felt that God saved you from something without you realizing it at the time. Your comment isn't just text on a screen. It creates a supportive space, a community where others can identify with you, find strength, and realize they're not alone. And each story you share might be exactly the word someone needed to read today. So if you can, write it down with an open heart. And while you're at it, like this video, because that helps much more than you imagine. When you leave a like, YouTube understands that this content has value, that this message deserves to reach other people who may need a warning, comfort, or simply to realize that God still speaks, even in silence. Your like is like a little push that makes this message go further. And if you feel that this type of content resonates with you, if it touches your faith, your story, or your moments of doubt, subscribe to the channel. That's how you ensure you'll continue receiving these testimonies, reflections, and warnings that can make a difference in your next steps. Your subscription is more than just a number. It's proof that there's a family here, growing together, attentive to the signs, learning to listen to the gentle voice that has often saved, and still saves, ordinary people like us. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Every like, every comment, every new subscription strengthens this mission and allows stories like this to continue being told with truth, emotion, and purpose. And now, returning to our story, it is precisely at this point, when everything seemed too calm, that something unexpected began to emerge, almost imperceptibly, like a whisper that no one imagined would be so important. This is where the line between the ordinary and the supernatural begins to blur, and this is where everything truly begins to change. It was curious how everything that day seemed exactly the same as the previous ones. The morning light had the same soft tones streaming through the window, the smell of coffee was the same as always, and even the silence of the house carried that feeling of comfortable, almost automatic routine. He woke up, stretched, quickly checked his cell phone, and followed his ritual, believing it would be just another ordinary chapter in his daily journey. Nothing signaled danger, nothing suggested change. Life sometimes seems to function like an autopilot, and it was precisely in this tranquility that the story began to take shape. He wasn't someone accustomed to supernatural experiments. On the contrary, he had a practical, rational mindset focused on clear decisions and concrete evidence. Spiritual signs, premonitions, or divine warnings weren't part of his repertoire. He was the type who needed to see to believe, and even then he would question before accepting. And perhaps that's why he didn't realize at that first moment that something different was happening. Because when the extraordinary hides behind the scenes of the ordinary, it almost always goes unnoticed. And yet it was there, lurking. As he walked through the house, getting ready to leave, he felt a pleasant stability, that feeling that everything was in its place. Every gesture seemed predictable, grabbing the keys, closing the door, organizing what he needed to take, mentally reviewing what he would do later. But suddenly, something silent began to bother him, like a light, almost imperceptible presence, touching his consciousness without permission. It was as if a strange thought arose from nowhere, a discreet impulse saying, "Wait a moment." It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a vision, it wasn't anything supernatural in ordinary eyes. It was just a feeling, a subtlety, a hidden truth pushing his attention to a point he couldn't name. And even without understanding, he felt it. He felt that kind of unexpected pause, a small interruption in the logical flow of the day. The rational mind tried to ignore it. After all, who hasn't had a strange premonition and just brushed it aside? Life goes on, commitments call, the clock doesn't stop. But, at the same time, there was something there, something insistent, gently knocking on the door of consciousness. It was as if God were speaking in the most discreet language possible, a language that can only be perceived when one is sensitive to the subtext of existence. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his normal rhythm, but the unease remained. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something else, a kind of silent warning, as if time were trying to alert him to the importance of a detail that, if ignored, could change everything. And this feeling began to provoke an internal transformation, albeit a very subtle one. It was as if his mind was being invited to see beyond the obvious, beyond habitual logic, and this affected him in a new way. This kind of presence, so delicate, raises questions we normally avoid. Why is this happening now? Why this pause? Where does this discomfort come from? And, even more profoundly, what would I fail to notice if I continued following the automatic flow of routine? He walked around the room, looking around, trying to identify some plausible reason for that discomfort. Nothing, absolutely nothing seemed out of place. And, paradoxically, that was exactly why that feeling became even stronger. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is the kind of moment that silently changes mindsets, that redefines how we interpret small details of life. Most people only recognize these signs after everything has already happened. They look back and realize that there was a hidden impact in that silence, a revelation that was trying to manifest itself without fanfare. So, when something so subtle appears, even without explanation, it's worth paying attention. It's as if spirituality is weaving a warning that doesn't reveal itself immediately, but which, later, makes perfect sense in the puzzle of the journey. An unease grew slowly within him, without drama, as if a soft voice were saying, "Don't go on yet." He held the doorknob for a few seconds, longer than usual, as if his body were trying to process a message his mind didn't yet understand. And there, standing, he began to realize that perhaps this day wasn't so ordinary after all. Perhaps something was waiting for him outside, something with the potential to change not only his routine, but the entire direction of his story. And it is precisely on that fine line between the natural and the spiritual, between logic and instinct, between the visible and the invisible, that this type of sign hides. What seemed like just another ordinary day was about to reveal something much greater than he could imagine. And even without fully understanding, he took a step back, breathed once more, and felt that this small delay, this seemingly meaningless pause, had a purpose that he would yet discover. Comment below, "That makes sense to me." He remained standing before the door as if something invisible were holding his hand. It was a strange, almost uncomfortable moment, because nothing around him justified this sudden delay. The street was quiet, the sun was beginning to illuminate the sidewalk, the day promised to be like any other. And yet, inside him, something screamed silently. An inner voice, soft, almost timid, said, "Don't go." It wasn't a complete sentence, it wasn't a dramatic warning, it wasn't an audible sound. It was more like an impulse, a thought that didn't fit into the routine, but repeated itself with stubborn insistence. He tried to ignore it, as we do when we want to continue on autopilot in life. He took a deep breath, adjusted the keys in his hand, and took another step toward the door. It was at that exact moment that the unease intensified, as if the very air around him had changed density. A kind of internal alarm began to pulse, a discomfort he couldn't explain. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to recover the logic that had always guided his decisions. "It's just anxiety," he told himself, a classic phrase used so often to silence what we don't understand. But this time, the feeling didn't go away. On the contrary, it became even clearer. There was no light in the sky. There was no vision. Nothing extraordinary happened. Just a whisper, insistent, discreet, and impossible to ignore. And this simplicity is what disconcerted him most, because he expected that, if God ever wanted to speak to him, it wouldn't be like this. He imagined something grand, something evident, something that would leave no doubt. But the supernatural doesn't follow our expectations. Often, the extraordinary chooses to hide in the subtle, as if speaking to those who learn to hear beyond the external noise. This was the kind of hidden truth that we only perceive when we are attentive to the interior, to what moves silently within us. He opened his eyes and realized his hands were trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, it wasn't panic, but an almost physical sensation that something was out of place. An unexpected change of course was beginning to take shape within him, as if his mind were trying to guide him in a direction he didn't yet understand. It was as if his own consciousness was torn between the desire to continue the routine and the inexplicable need to stop. This internal struggle began to generate a kind of emotional tension that contrasted sharply with the utterly ordinary scenery around him. He tried to reason. Maybe I forgot something. He opened his backpack, checked everything. Everything was fine. Maybe I'm tired, but he had slept well. Maybe it's just my imagination. But that impression was growing stronger. It was difficult to admit, even to himself, that that small warning had enough impact to interfere with his simplest decision, leaving home. And yet, something inside him knew he needed to listen. He needed to respect that pause. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is exactly where many stories of deliverance begin. In a doubt that no one takes seriously, in a feeling that we try to explain rationally, in a discomfort that seems to make no sense. This is how many miracles manifest themselves, behind the scenes of life, before any revelation, before any visible event. We tend to expect grand signs, but real transformation begins in small internal movements, when something makes you rethink a step, adjust a choice, stop for a moment. It is at this point that seemingly simple decisions can define an entire journey. He walked a few steps away from the door, as if trying to distance himself from the discomfort. But the whisper continued. That short, almost silent phrase kept returning to his mind. "Don't go." He ran a hand over his face, trying to push the feeling away, as if he could push the warning away. However, the more he tried to silence it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a loose emotion. It wasn't a passing feeling. It had weight, direction, intention, and this deeply affected his mentality, as if his soul were trying to guide him before his mind understood the reason. The unease began to transform into something bigger, something that seemed to touch deeper regions of his being. It was as if a part of him knew that this moment carried an importance he couldn't yet see, a kind of premonition that didn't frighten him but alerted him. At that instant, he realized he was facing something that transcended logic. What should have been just another ordinary day was revealing itself as the beginning of a sequence of events that would later become part of a larger story, a story that would change his perception of purpose, sensitivity, and protection. He sat for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to organize his thoughts. The silence of the house seemed more intense, as if even the atmosphere was conspiring to help him hear what truly mattered. And there, between the thin line between the natural and the spiritual, his journey began to take another turn. A turn he hadn't planned, but one that was calling to him with a force impossible to ignore. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. He stood there for a few more moments, trying to convince himself that it was all an exaggeration, that there was no point in backing down just because of a strange feeling. His mind searched for coherence, for logic, as if trying to salvage his own rational narrative. He almost laughed to himself, thinking about how strange it would be to explain to someone that he was paralyzed in front of a door because of an inner whisper. But, at the same time, something inside him was changing. A kind of silent, almost imperceptible transformation was beginning to take hold. A change of mindset that didn't come through arguments but through intuition, and this deeply disconcerted him. He breathed again, more slowly, trying to regain control. But suddenly, the feeling changed. The warning became stronger, more urgent, almost as if it had a form inside him. It was no longer just the repeated "don't go" from before. Now it was another phrase, even more intense, that seemed to emerge from the depths of his soul. Come back, now. These words had no real sound. They didn't echo in the environment, but inside him they vibrated like a silent rumble. He felt his heart race in a way that wasn't fear, but awareness. Awareness that something invisible was happening, that the warning was not optional. It was at that moment, without fully understanding, that he made the decision. A simple decision, but one that would change absolutely everything. He took his hand off the doorknob, took 2 steps back, and closed the door, not to leave but to stay. A small, almost insignificant gesture, but with a weight he would only understand later. And as he took those steps, he noticed that the silence around him seemed different. It was as if the entire atmosphere had held its breath along with him, as if there was something lurking behind the scenes of that situation that was about to be revealed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this type of seemingly trivial decision is the exact point where many stories diverge, where a simple choice to stay or to go, to wait or to move forward, defines not only the course of the day, but the course of an entire life. It is here that the powerful contrast is created between the silence of the warning and the magnitude of the impact it carries. It's as if God, knowing exactly what was about to happen, chose to act in the most discreet way possible, protecting without fanfare, guiding without frightening. And it is in this almost invisible space between action and intuition that many deliverances occur. He went back into the room and tried to calm down, trying to understand why that feeling was so intense. He looked out the window, observed the street, tried to identify anything that would justify that interruption. Nothing, absolutely nothing seemed wrong. And so, doubt began to creep in. Am I exaggerating? Is this just a silly feeling? But at the same time, the feeling persisted. It was as if the warning was deepening within him, as if there were a layer of hidden revelations waiting for the right moment to emerge. It was strange to realize that the more he tried to rationalize, the clearer it became that he needed to obey. There was no noise, no external urgency, no visible sign of danger. Only that inner whisper, so soft and so firm at the same time. And it was this subtlety that marked him, because deep down he knew that if he ignored it, he would be going against something greater than his own understanding. It was as if every fiber of his body was saying, "Stay still, don't take another step outside." And then he stayed. He wandered aimlessly through the house, opened the refrigerator without feeling hungry, looked at the clock and realized that several minutes had passed since he should have left. And it was then, exactly then, that the feeling changed again. As if the edict had fulfilled its purpose. A slight relief began to replace the unease, as if the danger had passed him by without finding him. He didn't know it yet, but the revelation was very close. The hidden truth of all that discomfort was about to manifest itself. That's when he heard a distant noise, something that made his heart stop for a second. A loud impact, a metallic sound, a bang that didn't belong to the tranquility of that morning. He ran to the window, holding his breath, and saw a confused commotion outside. People, looking at the street, hands on their heads, someone running. He frowned, trying to understand. Something had happened nearby, very nearby, and a strange, icy sensation began to run down his spine. It was as if his body already knew what his mind couldn't yet process. He stepped away from the window, walked slowly toward the door, as if emotionally preparing himself to see what had happened. Each step seemed heavier than the last. He carefully opened the door, only putting half his body out, and looked in the direction from which the noise had come. And then, everything made sense. 2 minutes after the time he would have left, the tragedy had occurred exactly on the path he takes every day. He stood there, observing the scene, feeling his heart pounding in rhythm with the shock. It was impossible not to notice the brutal contrast between the silence of the warning and the magnitude of the deliverance. What had seemed like just an inexplicable inconvenience, a delay without reason, had just saved his life, and he knew it without anyone needing to explain. It was as if he had just witnessed, in practice, the real impact of obeying a voice that no one else heard. Write this down. I would have felt that way too. When he finally understood what had been avoided, it was as if the ground had disappeared for a moment. His breath caught in his throat, his body felt light and heavy at the same time, as if trapped between two worlds. What almost happened, and what, through sheer intervention, didn't happen. The distant sounds of people talking, of sirens arriving, of the chaos spreading through the street seemed to come from very far away, as if he were seeing everything through thick glass, the kind that muffles noise and reveals only slow, distorted movements. Because at that exact moment, he couldn't hear anything, only his own heart beating strongly, as if it wanted to remember every second. You are alive. And the most curious thing is that, minutes before, everything seemed so normal, so predictable, so within the tranquil script he imagined for that day. But now, looking from a distance at what could have been his end, it was impossible not to feel a profound, almost overwhelming impact. The scene was too vivid. The accident had happened precisely at the intersection where he would have passed. The explosion, or the robbery, or the collision between the cars, depending on how the tragedy unfolded at that moment, had been so sudden that no one there would have had time to react. It was the kind of event that catches even those who pay attention. It was the kind of event that doesn't give a second chance. And he knew, if he had followed the planned route exactly, if he hadn't heeded that silent warning, if he hadn't listened to that unsettling feeling that insisted on changing everything, he would be at that exact point, at that exact fraction of time. There would be no way to escape. This awareness came like a strong wave, one of those that takes your breath away, makes your hands tremble, and makes your mind spin. He leaned on what was nearby, a wall, a post, his own car, and tried to organize the whirlwind of emotions that were mixing inside him. Relief, fear, gratitude, bewilderment. It was such an intense combination that it left him speechless, without reaction, without any attempt to rationalize. And for a few seconds he just stood there, observing the chaos from a distance, unable to cope with the truth unfolding before his eyes. Because it hadn't been a coincidence. It hadn't been a silly delay. It hadn't been luck. It hadn't been instinct. And he knew it. He knew it with a clarity that even the people around him couldn't dispute. It was divine guidance. An invisible intervention, but precise, insistent, perfectly timed. A warning that came before the tragedy, without light, without spectacle, without fanfare. Just a whisper. Just an unease that persisted when he almost ignored it. This awareness weighed on my chest in a different way, almost as if something inside was being realigned. My mindset shifted in seconds because that moment had a meaning that transcended the physical, the logical, the observable. It was as if the backstage of my own life had been laid bare for a brief instant, revealing that there is a hidden truth guiding steps, protecting paths, diverting routes precisely when it seems that everything is under control. And it's curious how we only perceive the magnitude of these things when we see the size of the impact they prevent. He felt his eyes welling up without even trying to hide it. It wasn't shame. It was shock mixed with pure gratitude, the kind that springs so deep it almost hurts. His throat tightened, his breathing became irregular, and behind it all lay a silent question. How did I almost ignore that? The answer didn't come in words, it came in understanding. Modern life trains us to trust only in the visible, the logical, what can be explained. But some of the greatest deliverances don't present themselves as bright signs, but rather as small sensations that seem insignificant, yet carry an enormous spiritual urgency. And it was precisely this urgency that persisted within him, an insistence that now revealed itself as the line separating the continuation of his story from the possibility of an abrupt end. The revelation was all too clear. Someone was taking care of the details. Someone saw what he didn't see. Someone knew what he didn't know. And the emotional shock of this open space for profound reflection, the kind that transforms not just one day, but the entire journey from here on out. Because when you confront something so closely that could have destroyed your whole life in seconds, perception changes. Consciousness expands. Sensitivity increases. The relationship with one's own decisions takes on a different weight. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something about these silent moments that many people don't realize, and that makes all the difference in understanding why certain deviations happen exactly when they need to happen. It's as if there's a secret alignment between the warning and the deliverance, and when you recognize that, everything takes on a new meaning. He knew this. Perhaps he couldn't explain it with technical words, perhaps he didn't master spiritual or theological terms, perhaps he didn't even have experience with these revelations before. But one thing was extremely clear. If he had persisted, he wouldn't be there breathing, observing everything from afar and trying to process the magnitude of what happened. With each passing second, the emotion grew. It wasn't just about escaping. It was about being preserved even before realizing the danger. This affected him in an almost irreversible way, because it awakened an understanding he had never considered with such intensity. There is a protection that operates before we know we need it. An intervention that acts behind the scenes while we go about our lives normally, believing we are in control of everything. But on that day, faced with that scene that could have been his end, he understood that he was not alone. He never was. Even without being able to organize everything, even with his mind racing and his heart still in shock, he knew that this event could not be ignored. It was the kind of experience that leaves a mark, that transforms, that changes the way you see every simple detail of everyday life. And it was precisely at this point, at this instant when understanding began to deepen within him, that something even more revealing began to form in his consciousness, as if another piece of this great puzzle was about to fall into place. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. When he finally managed to take a deep breath and let his heart slow down, something began to mature within him in an almost silent, yet profound way. It was as if the experience itself was opening space for a greater revelation, something that had nothing to do with what happened that day, but with an internal transformation that had been building little by little, almost without him realizing it. Because the truth is that these extreme moments, those instants when life changes direction because of a detail, a detour, a warning as delicate as a whisper, have the ability to affect not only the mind, but also how a person sees everything from then on. And he realized there was a hidden lesson in that deliverance. Not a harsh lesson, full of recriminations, but a hidden truth that, when revealed, changes one's mindset. A truth he probably would have ignored if nothing had happened, if he had continued his routine, if the day had gone on like any other. But now it made perfect sense. Sometimes God speaks softly, not because he can't speak loudly, not because he wants to make things difficult, but because there is a kind of sensitivity that only arises when you learn to listen in silence. And this perception was so powerful that he felt the weight of this revelation fitting into areas of his life that weren't even directly connected to the danger he had escaped. It was as if a new awareness was forming within him, an opening to pay attention to what had always been there, but which he hadn't recognized. And this, in a very natural way, led to the understanding that perhaps these seemingly simple inconveniences, a delay, a change of route, a door that won't open, a person who cancels an appointment, are not just random interruptions but strategic moves he had never considered. The thought passed through him smoothly, yet firmly. What if God is using those very details to guide you, even when you don't understand them? This insight opened the door to something even deeper. because by observing his own heart at that moment, he realized that he wasn't the only one living like that, on autopilot, ignoring small signs, treating internal sensations as anxiety, haste, irritation. How many people go through this daily? How many times does someone feel an inexplicable discomfort, a sudden perception, a change of course that seems disruptive, but in reality carries a protection that the person would only understand later? Perhaps you yourself, who are following this story, have already experienced moments like this and haven't recognized the hidden impact behind them. And that's the most incredible thing. When he started connecting the dots, he realized that every interruption has a reason. What seems like a delay might be realignment. What seems like a loss might be a danger avoidance. What seems like frustration might be care. Life gains another layer when you understand that not everything that breaks, that is delayed, or that closes is punishing you. Sometimes it's saving you. And this awareness doesn't come with noise, doesn't come with spectacle, doesn't come with obvious signs. It comes in the same way that the warning that day came, silently, persistently, almost too subtly for those who live in the accelerated rhythm of the modern world. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something about these small deviations that few people notice, and that he himself only understood after looking back more calmly. Life doesn't unfold randomly. There are movements behind the scenes of the journey, imperceptible alignments, directions that happen even before the mind can formulate a logical explanation. And the most impressive thing is that the more sensitive you become to this, the more you begin to perceive a kind of thread connecting events, a thread that has always been there, guiding, protecting, redirecting. He understood that listening to that inner whisper isn't just about avoiding danger. It's about being guided. It's about decisions that seem small but change destinies. It's about not ignoring what seems fragile but actually carries spiritual strength. And this understanding brought about a silent, yet profound transformation. From that day on, he began to pay attention, not to the noises of the world, but to that inner voice that insisted when he was about to go down the wrong path. And perhaps that's what you also need to start realizing. Those discomforts you feel don't appear for no reason. Those delays you complain about don't happen by chance. Those detours that frustrate your plans may be preventing you from doing something you can't even imagine. What seems like an interruption can be a blessing in disguise. This phrase echoed within him like a reminder, a trademark of that day that would never be forgotten. And as this truth took hold, he began to understand that life is full of these signs, these subtle touches that want to protect you even before you know what you need to be protected from. But this perception only grows when you learn to listen, when you give space for this whisper to gain meaning, when you begin to look at your own journey with less hurried and more attentive eyes. And it is precisely at this point in the story, in this inner awakening, in this expansion of consciousness, that something even deeper begins to take shape within him, as if another understanding were about to emerge, an understanding capable of completely changing the way he sees not only the deliverance of that day, but the entire trajectory of his own life. Comment below, this makes sense to me. And if you've made it this far, walking with me through every detail of this story, it's because, in some way, all of this resonated with you on a deeper level. So let me ask you something very simple, the same way we talk to those close to us. If this content made sense, if it sparked something in you, if it touched some area within you, subscribe to the channel. Not as an obligation, but as a way to continue receiving messages that strengthen your journey, that illuminate decisions, that help you perceive signs that sometimes go unnoticed in the rush of daily life. Subscribing is what allows me to continue bringing this type of content with truth, care, and purpose. And if this conversation added to you, it will add even more to the next ones. And take this opportunity to leave a comment with a phrase that marks your presence here until the end. Right? I'm with you until the end. So I know you've walked with me to this very end of the story, and that helps me understand how much this message truly resonated in your heart. Oh, and look, after everything we've shared here, it ends up being almost automatic. It's not just a button. It's a gesture that shows there's a connection, that this exchange made sense, that it's worth continuing. If you feel it in your heart, leave a like. And since you're here, in this mood for reflection and discovery, there's a video over here that perfectly complements what we discussed today. Click and continue with me there. I'm sure it will further deepen this journey.